Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, that's time already? Whoa. Basketball.
Welcome into another episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball college. I'm your host, Brian Ralph. Joined as always by my co-hosts, Connor Hope, Riley Davis. We're continuing our conference tournament preview series. This is the final one. We're going over, for my money, the best conference tournament, the Big East tournament. So we had to bring in Mr. Big East himself, John Fanta. Thanks for joining us, man.
Brian, Connor, Riley, it's great to be with you. It's been a fascinating season in the Big East because you think about it, guys, through November, there was a talk, the murmurs about, hey, is this a down year for the league? And I think that the league has a clear bottom, but the top has been better than we thought it would be, and that lends itself for it to be, overall, a quality year for the Big East because they're going to get some really strong seeds in the NCAA tournament. The full temperature, though, of this conference and how we put it will be determined by whether or not these high seeds actually validate their seeds come next week. But for now, they go to war inside Madison Square Garden. Fellas, it is going down.
It is the tournament that every other conference tries to replicate, and we know this because of how many conferences have randomly held tournaments in New York City, and none of them have been able to duplicate the excitement and the drama that the Big East tournament brings every season. It's going to bring it again. You mentioned that the teams at the top, they're all, I think, capable of winning this. You go down 1 through 5 and even 6, Villanova in there. No real bubble teams. Like I think everyone's pretty set, John, moving forward to the NCAA tournament, with the exception of maybe Providence. Yeah. Do you think Providence is safe? I know that conversation has restarted, or does Providence have to beat UConn to feel good on Selection Sunday?
Yeah, I think that they've got to beat UConn to feel great on Selection Sunday, but because of how soft the bubble is, fellas, I just don't think that Providence is a team that the committee's going to then penalize to the degree of, all right, you're out of the field. And that really has to do with, I think a lot of this discussion involved has to do with the level of recency bias because of their recent losses. However, if you look at their entire resume, it's not a strong resume. I mean, it really isn't.
Right.
They didn't do much in their non-conference. They didn't. There's no win that makes you say, wow, in their non-conference. In fact, their non-conference schedule was pretty soft. They're 6 and 8 away from their home court. They've struggled away from home. 10 of their 21 wins have come in quad 4. But they don't have a quadrant 4 loss. They do have one quad 3. And they've made up for it, by getting 4 quadrant 1 victories and by not really having a hurtful Q2 record. So for me, when you have beaten Creighton and you've beaten Marquette and you've beaten Connecticut, and let's just say that we put them with those other teams that we're talking about they have some wins of caliber that some of those other bubble teams just simply do not possess. And that's why at the end of the day, when you combine that with the fact that they have no back-breaking loss, I just don't see the committee looking at them on Thursday and saying, oh, you lost to UConn, now you're out of the field. Not when right now they're like a 9 or a 10 seed.
Right, and it's not like UConn's a bad loss. You're not going to get punished for beating a team that I think is playing as well, maybe as anybody in the country, but certainly anybody in the Big East. Connor, Riley, do either of you have any concerns about Providence going into Selection Sunday?
No, and I think this stems from the fact that I don't have any concerns for Auburn going into Selection Sunday, really, at this point. And I would put them in very, very similar situations, right? A lot of wins, not really many bad losses. They don't have any marquee. Well, Auburn didn't have any marquee wins until that Tennessee win. But they're playing good basketball. The metrics are sound. And I would put Providence ahead of Auburn. So if I put Providence ahead of Auburn and I don't feel bad about Auburn, and this isn't supposed to be an SEC podcast, but if I don't feel bad about Auburn, I can't really feel all that bad about Providence.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have
Riley,
any concerns. Yeah, I wouldn't say I have any concerns about them making the dance. My bigger concern is how will they fare. Just looking at their schedule, their one win over the last 2 weeks came at Georgetown. Not exactly inspiring. Of course, they lost a close one at home to Xavier before getting blown out at Seton Hall. And this is a team that I like a lot of the pieces. I think Devin Carter is kind of your prototypical perimeter defender who every team would like to have, who can just kind of take an opposing guard out of the game. Bryce Hopkins is another player whose game I've loved since seeing some of his high school tape. I think there is like a point forward there somewhere. You see flashes of it here and there. He's able to create for himself. And, of course, you have Jared Bynum, who's made a name for himself making big-time shots over the last 2 years. And that's my concern is there something that's like, I asked this because I don't know. I don't know what's led to these recent losses, but that they're not exactly coming into this tournament with the best feelings or the best momentum. And, maybe they're able to get some of that magic back in MSG.
I think Fanta can speak more to this, but it seems like Ed Cooley's just been really pissed off with their effort level and focus.
They haven't defended at all. I mean, they couldn't defend us right now. They switch on ball screens. They switch on ball screens, guys, and that's leading their worst defenders to getting exposed. And I also think what's happening is it's really good scheme. Sean Miller last week said, all right, Devin Carter is Providence's best defender. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to shy away from him. I'm going to make him work the hardest on the floor. And that's exactly what he did. He put him in off-ball screens. He made him rotate. He made him work all night. And eventually, Xavier just wore Providence out. And that's kind of what Miller's done this season is he kind of takes what you're best at and he actually makes it a flaw. He actually makes it a flaw of yours as the game goes on. So, I look at this situation here with Providence. They got to defend a heck of a lot better. You're giving up 94 points to Xavier. You're giving up 82 points to Seton Hall, who is a bad offensive team. The Pirates are a bad offensive team. Providence's effort level hasn't been there. They got to wake up. Now, I will say this. Cooley's the type of guy that is an elite motivator. He's had teams that have struggled going into the NCAA tournament, and then all of a sudden they win, or the Big East tournament, and all of a sudden they win a game or two, and you're like, where did this come from? So that's the one saving grace. But you know what? Bryce Hopkins has got to get back in line. He's got to be the best player on the floor for this team to win, and they got to get right defensively because if they don't, UConn will run them out of the gym on Thursday. We know this much. Providence is going to put their best effort forward on Thursday. If you can't get up for that game, you're not going to get up for any game.
Well, I think that's the one that's set in stone that everybody's looking forward to because the games on Wednesday are kind of more of the appetizers. No real main course there. Fanta, in your mind, what is the matchup or potential matchup down the road that you would find most intriguing? Is it that UConn-Providence game, or is it one that might happen later?
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting if we end up getting first off, the 9:30 game between Villanova and Creighton is interesting because Villanova really commanded Creighton the last time out. They beat them by 12. If we get a Creighton-Xavier semifinal, from a basketball watching perspective, guys, wow. Because Xavier almost brings out Creighton's offense by virtue of the way Xavier plays. Like, Creighton's comfortable in that game. Not to disparage Creighton, but, they haven't been a great shot-making team. Although against Xavier they have been, for whatever reason, they match up really well with the Musketeers. The game that those two schools played in Cincinnati earlier this season was an incredible basketball game with high-level offense. If we get that game in the semifinals of the Big East tournament, it is going to be tremendous, absolutely tremendous. I would love the dynamic of a Marquette, UConn, as well as Creighton-Xavier semifinal slate. It might not be the sexiest in terms of the Northeast schools in the Big East because I know people love that and they love all. But when we're talking basketball, and here at Heat Check we talk actual hoops. You guys actually appreciate great basketball.
That's right.
You don't fall in love. You don't fall in love with some team that's 1-9 against Quadrant 1 and doesn't belong in the NCAA tournament.
Okay, come on now, Fanta. That's not necessary. I've taken so much flack throughout these podcasts. You have one bad year, everybody.
Rightfully so. Rightfully so.
Yeah, I'm not getting invited back. That's for damn sure. No, I'm just kidding. I'll tell you what. I really do think that Villanova fighting for its life against Creighton, where it seems like Villanova matches up really well with Creighton. I mean, Villanova almost beat Creighton in Omaha, and then they beat them by 12 in Philly. So is Greg McDermott going to make an adjustment? Because Eric Dixon is a bad matchup for Ryan Kalkbrenner. Creighton's got to figure something out there, or else.
That is
Riley, what about for you? What game are you looking at?
I was just going to add that's kind of the biggest surprise to me thus far is how bad of a matchup Dixon has been for Kalkbrenner, because watching him since he came back from whatever illness it was that kept him out, I was like, this dude is matchup proof. Thought he was the best defender. I mean, I know he just won Big East Defensive Player of the Year, thought he was among the best defenders in the country. Kind of surprised that Villanova has been able to exploit a little bit something there, because, I thought Kalkbrenner was the type of defender who could, guard the rim and slide his feet out a little bit on the perimeter. But anyway, you asked for the matchups. I think that Marquette UConn, hopefully we get that matchup in the semifinals to kind of break the tie with them having split in the regular season. For my money, those are the two best teams in the Big East. I don't know if the casual fan who might not be locked in as much, or who's only paying attention to the big names, or maybe they're just even looking at the stereotypes that have followed both of these schools in the past, especially UConn as like a more of a gritty defensive-minded team. Both these teams share the ball so exceptionally well. And I know everybody loves Tyler Kolek, those who are more plugged in. I mean, I think he'll probably win Big East Player of the Year, but on the flip side, UConn is also 8th in the country in assist rate. I mean, they share the ball exceptionally well. It's not that stereotypical Dan Hurley offense that kind of gets mucked down a lot, like at the slightest hint of a resistant defense. So I'd be super ecstatic to see that matchup happen in the semis.
Connor, Riley brought up Kalkbrenner.
I was just going to say, the one thing I would say to you guys is, if we were able to get a UConn-Creighton final, Creighton has won 6 of 7 games over UConn. Creighton has never won the Big East tournament. They've been to the final 4 out of 9 times. 4 out of 8 times, because there wasn't a tournament in 2020. Yeah. So half of the Big East tournament championship games that have happened since reconfiguration, Creighton's been in them. They've never won them. Meanwhile, you'd have a UConn team that's trying to get back on the mountaintop in the Big East and would set the Garden on fire. Now, that would be a juicy final.
I think that's the one I'm looking forward to. I think you've sold me on that one. I think that's the one I'm rooting for now. Connor, Riley brought up Kalkbrenner. Obviously, he plays such a key role in everything Creighton does. Who else? What other players are you looking at, Connor, that are going to shape the way this tournament plays out?
It might be the WCC in me, but watching what Sule Boom has done this year from deep for Xavier,
yes,
he might be maybe not the best player, but he might be the most fun player to watch in the Big East, just offensively. So from that perspective, if you're looking at a team like Xavier to make that run to the championship, I think Sule Boom has to be a massive part of that. And the other one for me is probably David Jones, or at least someone on St. John's, right? St. John's was a missed free throw away from sending the game to overtime at Marquette. So they have talent. They can run the floor. They're erratic. It's an erratic team with erratic players, and we knew that coming into the season. But in a win-or-go-home setting, could St. John's throw a wrench in things? Maybe. And I think that's where those top players for St. John's have to step up. It's in Madison Square Garden. They're familiar with that arena, so anything can happen.
Connor, St. John's has not been to the Big East semifinals since 2000. 2000. It has been 23 years. I can tell you fellas this much. Whether it's St. John's or UConn or Providence, if St. John's is meeting either of those two Friday night at the Garden, it will produce as wild of an atmosphere that you've seen in a conference tournament, maybe ever. Because St. John's fans are rich. There's tons of them. They just have had nothing to cheer for. They wouldn't have to travel for that game Friday night. It's in their backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in agreement with you. I would not be shocked. St. John's actually matches up pretty well with Marquette because there's an erratic nature to Marquette, but they kind of are under control while doing it. But sometimes playing St. John's gets you erratic. And if that happens and Marquette's not shooting the ball great, then maybe, just maybe David Jones, and if Joel Soriano's controlling the paint, Posh Alexander, AJ Store's got to play well, maybe it's a ball game.
You mean playing the fastest team in the country can make you make mistakes?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Part of the strategy. Well, let's get your picks, Fanta. Is St. John's a potential dark horse? Who would your dark horse team be, and who would you pick to cut down the nets?
So my dark horse is actually going to be the 7th seed here. I'm actually going to go with Seton Hall. I think that Shaheen Holloway has captured a little bit of something without Kadari Richmond. The ball's not sticking as much for the Pirates. And Dre Davis and Femi Odikali are playing well. Davis coming back. He was out for an extended period of time with an injury. It really hurt Seton Hall from doing anything in terms of the NCAA tournament pursuit. So the Pirates are fighting for their lives. My logic with this, Brian, is, to your question is, if you were a team that was on the bubble, that was actually playing pretty well at one point. They had won 8 of 9 at one point. They were beating teams they were supposed to, but they were winning those games. That you have it in you, if you beat UConn coming back from 17 down, you have it in you to beat a good team. Mm-hmm. Back in December, Seton Hall had the ball against Xavier down by a point with the ball with like 10 seconds left at the Cintas Center. They lost the game, but they played Xavier tough. I would not be shocked to see Seton Hall make it to the semifinals. I don't think that they're going to win this thing, but once you get to the semis of a conference tournament, anything could happen. So whereas a lot of people are picking Villanova, I'll be a little bit contrarian, and I could see Holloway, becoming the story later this week of, it's March, he's done this before, when really his teams just play a style that's kind of tough to prepare against because of their defense.
And Xavier's not going to have Zach Fremantle, which could also play a major factor in that matchup. Riley, what about for you? Dark horse and title pick.
Bro, looking at it's hard to even pick a dark horse because, I get where you're coming from on St. John's. I get where you're coming from on Seton Hall. Definitely not Butler, definitely not Georgetown. And with Villanova has just been gassed up so much over the last month to win this thing that they don't even feel like a dark horse anymore. So I guess I'll just roll with Seton Hall. Because I like that defense. So actually, you know what? Georgetown.
Well, who's
Pat Ewing does it again. Recreates a little 2021 magic.
We're just gonna edit that part out. That's fine. Georgetown's not winning a game in this thing. Who do you have winning it? Who do you have winning it?
Me or Fanta?
Who do I have winning it? I have Creighton. I'm picking Creighton to win the tournament. Creighton's my Big East tournament champion.
Riley?
I'm rocking with UConn. I think they're coming to remind everybody about those non-conference. Yeah.
I picked Xavier for the Jerome. I like this team, even without Fremantle. They're playing decently well. I think Torvik has them in the top 2 or 3 in the conference. But the more I think about it, the more I just hate their draw. I'm a UConn fan. As a child, my mom went to UConn when Calhoun and Oriema first started there. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to go with the Huskies getting back up on the mountaintop.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm going with UConn as well. I think they're back to playing like the team that started 14-0. Like they're not just playing like the best team in the Big East. They're playing like one of the best teams in the country. I think Villanova can make a little run. It's played out. They match up well with Creighton. I think we see that happen, but UConn will be the team cutting down the nets at Madison Square Garden on Saturday. That'll do it for this episode of the Heat Check Hangout, getting your number one source for all things basketball college. Our co-hosts Connor Hope and Riley Davis want to send a big thank you again to John Fanta for joining us. That wraps up our conference tournament preview series. If you missed any of them, make sure you catch them in your feed or on our YouTube channel. Thank you guys for listening or watching us if you are on YouTube. We'll talk to you again next time.
Basketball college. Basketball college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball college. Come on. Basketball college. Whoa. Basketball college. Whoa, basketball college.